Hello there, it's Sarah from Paper Lovely. Thanks for joining me today. I'm guest designing for Love From Lizi this month using their July 2018 card kit. I posted an unboxing video a few days ago, so you can check that out to see the kit contents. But since I'm including all 10 cards in one video today, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So here for card number 1, I wanted to create a beach at the bottom, and I originally took some score tape and placed that along the blue cardstock, but when I attached the sand, although it gave me great texture, you could still see through it and it looked too blue. So I grabbed a piece of Nina Desert Storm cardstock and attached that to the bottom of my card base. And here I'm grabbing some Nuvo glue. I'm just going to spread that around with my finger, and then I will go ahead and dip that into this coffee filter that I have added some of the sand to. And this gave me some really great texture along the bottom of my card there. So next, from one of those decoupage sheets, there was a really cute frog sitting under an umbrella, and I thought he was perfect to place on my beach. So I'm using some of the included foam adhesive and placing that along the back of this. And I'm just sort of using this as an ephemera piece. So I'm going to peel away that backing, and then I will place him down on the top of my card base. And then also I have this Fun in the Sun sentiment, which I also pulled from one of the decoupage sheets. I'll do the same thing there, attaching foam dots to the back, and then I'll place that on the top of my card base. For the inside, I'm using a Nina panel trimmed to 4x5 1/4, and I'll go with that beach sentiment, stamping that out using some Lawn Fawn lobster ink. I'll use my ATG gun to attach that to the inside of the card base. And that will complete card number 1. For card number 2, I've used this beautiful background stamp with the starfish and the seashells. And to save some time, I've left out this stamping, but what I did was use some Fabriano hot press watercolor paper, and I used Versamark ink to stamp out the stamp and then heat emboss that with some Simon Says Stamp clear embossing powder. And now I've taped that down to my board, and I'm using my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers to color this in. I will have all of the colors that I use listed on my blog post for you. And I have sped this up quite a bit, and I just left in a little bit of the coloring for each of the elements so you can see how I put that together. So I went ahead and trimmed out the piece that I had watercolored, and I trimmed that down to 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. Then I grabbed some MFT cardstock, and I'm using blue raspberry and primitive white. From the blue raspberry, I trimmed out just 1/4 inch, and then from the primitive white, I trimmed out about 1 1/4 inch. So I'm going to place those all together for the front of my card base. There you saw on that primitive white, I stamped the Happiness Comes in Waves sentiment, and I used Lawn Fawn Hippo ink to do that. Now I'm going to take this panel and I'll place that at the top of my card base. I grabbed that small piece of the blue raspberry and added some foam tape behind that, so that's popped up a little bit. And then I'll use ATG to attach that bottom primitive white portion. For the inside, I again used some of that primitive white and trimmed that down to 4 by 5 1/4. And I'm again stamping the sentiment, Let's Celebrate, using Lawn Fawn Hippo ink. I'll place that on the inside of my card base. And then for a final touch, I'm going to grab the remainder of that blue raspberry piece, and I'll just place that under the sentiment on the inside. And that will complete card number 2. For card number 3, I'm working with one of the Decoupage sheets, and here I'm just popping out all of those little elements. I have taken that polka dot paper and trimmed it down to 4 by 5 1/4, and I'll place that here on top of the red card base. And then I'll take my bottom layer of the decoupage and place that in the center. Next, I'm grabbing this larger sheet and I'm going to place that right on top there using some pop dots. And I saved the other larger piece of that to put on the inside, but I am adding the puppy, the porthole window, and the bird with the ribbons again on top of that other larger piece. So now I'm working on my third layer of dimension. And then included in with those wood cuts was a ship's wheel. So I thought it would be cute to stick that underneath the puppy as if he was steering the ship. And I just adhered that with a glue dot. For the inside, I am working on a Nina panel trimmed to 4 by 5 1/4. I used Lawn Fawn's Milo's ABCs to write out You and Me and stamp that using Lawn Fawn lobster ink. There I took that larger piece I saved from the decoupage and placed that along the bottom, and I'll add that on the inside using my ATG gun. And that will complete card number 3. For card number 4, I've added a stripe of that green wood grain paper below this shimmery ice cream paper and trimmed that out using my Blueprints 32 frame die. Here I'm taking a piece of that blue ribbon and I'm just attaching that along the seam where the two of those meet. And I'll attach that to the back using ATG, and then I'll place that panel on the top of a red card base. Off camera, I went ahead and cut out a bunch of these ice cream cones. I had originally planned on using one of each flavor and then decided that I liked it better with just one cone. So I decided to go with the strawberry. And since it does the cutouts for the swirls, I went ahead and added some white behind that just so it looked like it was the striped ice cream. I've just adhered that using some multi-matte medium, and then there you saw I stuck in that chocolate piece. I'm using another one of those banners from the Decoupage set that reads Just For You, and I popped that up using some Scotch foam tape. Here for the ice cream cone, I'm going to add some of those pop dots behind it, and then I'll peel away the backing and place that off to the side of my sentiment. And then to finish that up, I created a bow with some more of that blue ribbon, and I'll attach that down with a glue dot and trim off the edges. For the inside, I'm again using a Nina panel trimmed to 4 by 5 1/4. I've gone with a happy birthday sentiment that matched the sentiment on the front really well, and I'm stamping that out using Lawn Fawn Peachy Keen ink. And this sentiment is from an old paper pumpkin kit. Here I decided I wanted to add a space for a gift card, so I'm just running that through with a Lawn Fawn gift card slot. And then I went ahead and trimmed off a small 1/4 inch piece of that shimmery ice cream paper, added some score tape to the back of that, and I'll place that along the bottom of this panel. I'll trim off that excess, attach it on the inside, and that completes card number 4. For card number 5, I'm going to make a shaker window using that sand that came in the kit. I'm going to show you how I did this, but I actually don't suggest that you repeat it. I decided I wanted to try and keep all of these elements out of the sand and sort of up front because they were getting a little bit lost when the sand fell down to the bottom. So this was actually my 3rd attempt trying to make this work because I really wanted to make it work. So I'm using a piece of acetate here, and I'm attaching the wooden starfish and 3 of those shells using some glue dots. And then what I did was slid that down into my We Are Memory Keepers pocket, and I trimmed that off because you're not going to be able to fuse through the acetate. So I had to trim that a little bit lower than my window. And then here I'm dumping in the sand behind that acetate. Now, if my acetate had been a little bit wider, this might have worked. It worked great for when I first finished the card here, but after it was moved around a little bit and it actually did shake around, the sand came around the front and it is kind of hiding the seashells at this point. You'll see that in the photo at the end and on my blog post. But I just wanted to show you how I made it, and maybe you can come up with an idea to keep it so that the seashells don't get lost. So there you saw I fused together that pocket, and I trimmed down this seashell and starfish paper. This was my favorite paper in the kit. I just loved it. And I trimmed that down to 4 by 5 1/4, added that to the top of a white card base. And here I'm adding some removable glue dots to that shaker pocket, and I'll place that on top of the card base. I also use my ATG gun to attach that sentiment, which is another one that I pulled off of one of the decoupage sheets. And I just placed that on top of that shaker window. For the inside, I'm stamping Let's Shell-abrate using Lawn Fawn Peachy Keen ink, and that's again a Nina panel trimmed to 4 by 5 1/4. I used a leftover piece of that really pretty paper and attached that along the bottom. Here I'll place this on the inside of my card base. And that will complete card number 5. For card number 6, I'm going to use this pattern paper that looks like it's the pool with all of the inner tubes floating in it, and I decided I wanted to create my own inner tube, so I'm using some scrap yellow paper, and I trimmed that out using 2 Sizzix circle dies, one that measures 2 inches and another that measures 1 1/4 inches. The 1 1/4 inch hole that left was a little bit too large for this frog that I wanted to have floating on that, and he is again one of the pieces from one of the decoupage papers. So I just used my Fiskars 1-inch punch and punched that out of the 1 1/4 inch ring, and then I placed that on the inside, added some Nuvo glue, and placed the frog on top of those. Here I trimmed down that pattern paper to 4 by 5 1/4 and attached that to the front. And if you can't see because it's so small, but the yellow rings that are on that pattern paper have some polka dots to them. So I used the white Nuvo drops that came in the kit just to mimic that and added that on the inner tube I created. And then I set that off to the side to dry. Here I'm working on the inside. I attached a little trim of that same pattern paper along the bottom of the inside of the card, and I am stamping directly on the card base here. I went with that beach sentiment again, stamping that in Lawn Fawn Lobster. Here I've got another sentiment from the decoupage kit. I've added that along that scrap piece of yellow paper and just added a little border around the bottom edge. Here I was going in to grab my mini wobbler, which is off to the side there, and I found these little googly eyes. So I thought they would be really cute to add onto the frog, and I'm attaching those there using some glue dots. And then here I'm going to take one of my mini wobblers and I'll peel away the backing and place that on the back of this inner tube. So he's really going to be bouncing around and floating on that pool. I'm going to work with this Beach Hut decoupage sheet, and I'm taking this second piece here and I am just taking my Fisker's fingertip craft knife and I am cutting along the top, bottom, and inside of those doors. And then I grabbed my pokey tool and I just ran that along the side there very lightly just to make a little bit of a crease. I don't want to tear the paper, so that I can fold those doors open. Here I've trimmed down that larger portion. I had already used the sentiment, and there I'm showing you I have a small piece of the patterned paper of all the beach chairs, and what I did is trimmed out the frog sitting on the beach chair from that. I cut right around that image. I'll show you that in a little more detail later. And here I'm taking that third image from the decoupage and I am trimming out the doors. I did also save the stairs so I could pop those up, but I wanted to attach these on the inside of my open doors so that wasn't looking quite so stark white. So I've trimmed those out and I'm going to add some Nuvo glue behind those and then I'll place them on the inside of my open doors. Here I've grabbed a scrap piece of white paper and I'm just going to use my ATG gun on either side of those doors to attach that for the inside of my little hut there. And then here I'll show you that frog, the little teeny tiny frog on the chair that I have cut out. And I will add some Nuvo glue behind that and attach that on the center of that opening there. Here I'm adding some pop dots behind that whole scene and I'm going to place that on top of that first decoupage sheet. And then I'll add all of those smaller pieces. I popped up the puppy dog, the stairs, the balls, and the pail, and then also the windows on the outside of those doors. On the inside there, I wanted a little sentiment to go along with that frog, and I had tried doing some ink masking and just making the sentiment say hi, but it didn't look quite right. So I ended up going with the happiness sentiment. I stamped that using Lawn Fawn lobster ink and then trimmed that out, added that with my ATG gun right above the frog there. On the inside, I'm again using my Nina panel trimmed to 4 by 5 1/4, and we'll stamp that beach sentiment using the Lawn Fawn lobster ink. For card number 8, I'm going to create another shaker card. So I've taken this piece from one of the Decoupage sets and just trimmed off that pink border. Here I've got a We Are Memory Keepers pocket. I've slid that down in there, and I'm using some of these sequins that came in the kit. I love this mix. It's really beautiful. It's such pretty. At this point, I realized that you could not read the happy birthday sentiment, so I grabbed another sentiment from one of the other decoupage sheets and just attached that across the top using my ATG gun. I've trimmed down that pink and white polka dot paper to 4x5 1/4, and I'll attach that to the top of my card base. And then I'm grabbing a Nina panel trimmed to 4x5 1/4. I'm again using a stamp set that was from a paper pumpkin kit, and I'll stamp out that hello sentiment using Lawn Fawn's Mermaid ink. I've got an extra piece of that pink and white polka dot that I'm going to place along the bottom here. And then from that same decoupage sheet, I grabbed the cat that would have been popped up on top of the chair and just placed that sleeping along the edge of that there. I'll attach my inside panel, and then I added some removable dots to that shaker window, and I'll pop that on the center of my card front. And that will complete card number 8. For card number 9, I've taken some Nina Desert Storm, and I have done some repeat stamping with that large stamp that came in the kit, and I stamped that using Simon Says Stamp Barely Beige. I wanted to have the pattern, but I didn't want to have it be too bold, and that really worked perfectly on this. So I'm going to use the sentiment Happiness Comes in Waves, and I decided I wanted to try and create some waves coming up on the beach. So I've grabbed my Ranger texture paste, and I've mixed in some Lawn Fawn Mermaid ink, and here I'm just sort of swiping this along the bottom to make it look a little choppy, a little bit like a wave. And I've used some of that blue, and then I wanted to have some of that white foam that you see when the waves come crashing in, so I'm using just some plain white texture paste and mixing that in to try and get that look. And I was really happy with the way that this came out. I wasn't quite sure as I was doing it, but once it was finished, I think it really does look like some waves crashing on the beach there. So here, since I have a longer card panel, I'm going to trim out a card base to match. And I have measured this at 8 inches by 8.5 inches and scored in the center at 4 1/4. So I'll just use my bone folder to crease that. Off to the side there, you'll see I've got a piece of MFT's Berrylicious. And I'm going to stamp the sentiment Happiness Comes in Waves using Lawn Fawn's Deep Sea ink. For the inside, I've trimmed down a panel of Nina Desert Storm to, this is 3 3/4 by 7.5 inches. And I'm using this sentiment, Let's Shell-abrate, and I'll stamp that using Lawn Fawn Mermaid ink. And then after I had stamped that, I realized I was actually not quite centered, which bothered me. So I grabbed one of the seashells and stamped that off to the side there, and now it looks perfectly centered. I'll attach that on the inside of the card base. And then again, you'll see over to the side from my card panel, I did trim that down also to 3 3/4 by 7.5. And then because the paper was warped slightly, I wanted to get a nice flat look on the top of my card base. So I'm going to use some 1/2 inch score tape and I place that starting first on either edge, and then I'll work my way in. And this really did allow me to get that to be nice and flat on the top of my card base. So when I place this down, since it's a larger panel and I have so much really strong adhesive on the back of that, I'm going to start at one corner and then slowly peel away that backing. So here I'm just lining that all up, and I'm going to press that down to get it started. Make sure it's nice and even, and then I'll peel a little bit more away, place that down a little bit more until I get to the very end. And that just helps me keep everything really nice and even for my borders around that. Finally, I took that sentiment, popped it up with some foam tape, and placed it in the upper right hand corner, and that completes card number 9. So for card number 10, I'm gonna again use one of these decoupage sets. I loved these. I had so much fun playing around with them. Like I said in my unboxing, I have always wanted to use them, but I never got my hands on any of them. So I have gone ahead and punched out all of the pieces, and I'm gonna add foam tape to the back of all of them. Here I'm adding some thin Scotch foam tape just behind that frame. It was a little bit easier, and it was fairly even enough that it worked with the foam dots that had been included in the kit. I'm going to center that first portion on the top of this yellow card base, and then I'll add this portion with the frame. Here I'll add on just this portion with the waves and the frogs. There was one more section that just had the feet sticking out of the inner tube and the waves. I saved that for the inside of my card, but I did use this last little strip of the wave with the fish at the bottom there. So this is actually 4 layers thick. I'm again on my trusty Nina panel trimmed to 4x5 1/4. I stamped out Happiness Comes in Waves using Lawn Fawn Deep Sea ink, and here I'm going to place that extra piece I saved in the center of my panel there. I'll attach that to the inside of my card base. And then for one last touch, because I don't have enough to mention, I grabbed those Nuvo drops again, and I'm just going over top of all the polka dots that are already on these inner tubes. Here is a quick look back at the cards from today. You'll find additional photos as well as a full list of supplies at my blog post, linked in the description below. If you enjoyed the video, please leave me a comment or a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.